Hello, welcome to the Shepherd's Rest Doc Talk. This is episode 208. I'm Cam. This is Plant. We're hoping to have Julie back with us. We've been very busy. She is in the middle of building a house. I mean, not her by herself, but she and her husband. And so that takes a lot of work. But eventually, we will be back like we should be. Anyhow, this year's going to look a little different. We're going to not necessarily have Doc Talks like this regularly. I don't think. We might end up doing it. But as of right now, we'll just have certain ones. The rest will come out looking more like discussions probably from our Friday nights. That's the thought. Who knows what it'll actually look like. So it just keep you in suspense. What I wanted to do today was to look at the four Gospels. We will be beginning our discussion this week will be in Matthew 1, 2, and 3, Luke 1, 2, and 3, Mark 1, I believe 1 to 12, and John 1, 1 to 32. I believe it'll be right here just to verify. It was also in the Facebook page. We are posting the readings for the week there. Okay, so let's look at this. I want to talk about Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Those are four Gospels. Often people will be like, oh, well, you know, four Gospels, 5 books of Torah. You will hear Acts as the fifth that make up those two, I guess, bookends. Acts is talking about what the people did as they were going into this kingdom that the Messiah had set up and as they're learning to walk in that kingdom. Just like Deuteronomy is preparing the people to go into Israel to learn how to walk properly there. Well, you could also throw in, maybe, you have the book of Acts, but you also have the book of Revelation acting that way in some aspects. Because remember Revelation chapter 3 and 4, Chapters 2 and 3 have the 7 epistles of Messiah as he is writing to the 7 churches. Each of those are helping to prepare them going into the millennium, which will then eventually go into eternity. Anyway, just a little bit of food for thought that we have those Acts as in walking in the kingdom now, and we have Revelation as in bringing us into millennium and eternity. Okay. So let's deal with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Let's remember back in Numbers, we have the setting up of the camps for Israel. We have the 4 camps. I would be asking you, do you remember what they are? But I can't hear you. So we have the Eastern camp, which starts or is led by Judah. Yes, he is the lion, right? He carries the lion. He has 3 tribes with him, or 2 other tribes with him. Then, and he's on the east side. Then if we go directly across on the west side, we have the ox. That is with Ephraim. Ephraim carries the ox. If you go on the south side is where we have Reuben, who was the man. He carries the man, okay? And then if we go on the north side, we had the tribe of Dan, who again had the tribes with him, and he has the eagle. Some will say it had a serpent on his ensign. Both can be representative of it, believe it or not. So we're going to say the eagle, which represents the deity. The 4 camps that are around the tabernacle where the Ark of the Covenant sat, with the Torah in the heart of the Ark, right? This is what protected, this is what surrounded it. If you think about the throne of God, what surrounded it were what we had cherubim, right? We have the cherubim and the seraphim. The cherubim have the 4 faces. The seraphim each have one of the faces. So think about this. Those camps, those angelic beings all give glory. All give glory to the Lord, all point to him and different aspects and facets of him. But together they make a whole. The Gospels do the same. We have Matthew, who is considered the kingly line, who's considered it is the book written by Levi, or Matthew, who was a disciple, who talks about the kingly role of Messiah. Not only that, he even starts with the lineage. He starts with from Abraham on down to Joseph, Yeshua's father, earthly father. And then we have the aspects that Matthew writes. A lot of the prophecies are saying, see, he's fulfilled. All these prophecies are pointing to who was going to be Messiah. The first miracle in the book of Matthew has to do with the healing of the leper. Well, Isaiah 53 is where Messiah is considered to be king of the lepers. He's the one that heals, that takes on the stripes, right? A sign of Messiah was the one who came and healed lepers, the one who came and cleansed lepers. That was going to be a sign of Messiah. So, as a king, kingly Messiah, the one who's going to rule, this is what Matthew talks about. So, let's move over to the ox, over to where Ephraim was, the west side of the camp. Here we have the servant. This is the Ephraim side. That's what the book of Mark talks about. He talks about the servant, the role of the servant of Messiah. You know, back to Matthew real quick. Matthew talked about the things that Messiah said, what a king said. The king's words are important. That's what the subjects are supposed to live by and walk by, right? That's what he talked about. But Mark talks about what he does, because that's what servants do. Servants are doers. He talks about what Messiah does. His first miracle he speaks of is the deliverance of the demons. Not the demons being delivered, but a person being delivered from demons. And this allows that person to then be able to serve the Lord. We're in that position. We have to be delivered from our flesh in order to now be able to say no to it, and whatever demonic things are living there, no to it, so we can now serve the master. Only serve one master, right? Now we can serve Messiah. We can serve the Lord. Then we move over to, let's see, who do we talk about? We talked about the lion with Matthew. We talked about the ox with Mark. Now let's move over to the tribe of Reuben, which held the man. That's what Luke is. Luke was a doctor. He was very interested in the man, okay, in the humanness of Messiah. He's the one that says, you know what? I am going to interview. He collects all the interviews. He has evidence, hard facts, and he says he's doing it in order, in an orderly manner. And he's presenting the story to another, probably Gentile, and Luke was a Gentile. So he's presenting it to another Gentile, and he's writing it as if he's a man. Not one who's entrenched in Judaism, but he shows the perspective of maybe what an outsider might look in and see, because he's writing this to a possible outsider. Luke writes Luke, and Luke also writes Acts. These are the two books that he puts together and sends ahead of Paul. So when Paul reaches Rome, these are the things that are testifying to who Messiah is and why Paul's doing what he's doing, and how Paul is walking properly in righteousness as called to for us to do by Messiah. Then we move to John. Now we're over to the book of tribe of Dan, right? The deity, all right? The eagle. John talks about the mystic. How did Messiah, how was he the Son of God? He begins with back at creation, right? The Word was with God. He came in flesh. I mean, he talks about the light, all the things that take us back to Genesis. And I failed to mention this. Luke, when Luke writes, he writes about the genealogy as well in Luke 3, but he goes from Adam and he goes backwards. We've got some great things to talk about when we look at the genealogies, but we'll save that for later. I just want to do a good base, I guess. And so let me jump back to Mark and Matthew. Matthew is Jewish. John Mark, actually wrote Peter's story. It's considered to be Peter's perspective. His mother was Jewish. His father was Gentile. He is Jew-Gentile. Interesting. And he's a servant. I just love that. All right. He came from a wealthy family. He, again, like I said, wrote probably Peter's story. And he's involved as well. There's a part, I think it's in Mark 14. I don't remember. I'll put it right here. Where he's talking about the rich man coming and saying, how can I follow you? And when he's told, you've got to sell everything, right? Oh. But he adds this interesting thing about how he was still loved or beloved. So it leads us to think that maybe that could have been Mark. Now, did he start following them immediately or later? We don't know that, but it just gives a hint. And the reason why we say Peter's story is because in 1 Peter, we see where Peter refers to John Mark as his son, very close. Like we have Paul doing that with Timothy, we have Peter doing that with Mark. Very close. I think I mentioned the miracles, the leper, and for Matthew, deliverance from demons for Mark. Luke does the same thing with the deliverance of demons. And John talks about turning water into wine. I mean, that's one of those mystic things. There's so many other things going on there than just giving a drink to some great partiers for a wedding. There's so much more involved in that. Again, we'll discuss that when that time comes. When we're reading through these books, we want to remember the perspective. We want to remember that Matthew is talking about the kingly. He's talking about, say hello. Hello. He's talking about things that would pertain or be important for a king. He's talking about the perspectives of how Messiah fulfilled a kingly role. When we talk about Mark, we're going to see how Messiah with the servant role. All right, how he did things that kings wouldn't do, but Messiahs, saviors, those who are serving the Father for others definitely would. When we read Luke, we're going to look at things that perspectives that just show that he was man. He was a son of man. He was the second Adam. He was the one who came as the fallen man who fixes it. Okay. We're going to see those things, how he was human, but even in his humanness, he's able to walk out the desires of the Father. And the desires of the Father are his desires. Something great that we need to pick up on. And then John, it's all about how he is the Son of Man. The Son of God. And we want to look at all these perspectives as we read through. And I may have already said that, but I want to just reiterate because that's very important. John's really going to look at things as what was and how it's linking it, coming from the Father and bringing it in, okay? And now we see it housed in Messiah. He talks about how, Abraham acknowledged me. What about you? He talks a lot, just the word from the beginning. It's a lot of the was coming into now. But when we get to Luke, interesting, Luke talks about those feelings. What was felt as a man, the emotions that are involved. Mark talks about what happened. Come on, let's go. Servants got to do. He's talking about the action of what happens. But when we get to Matthew really talks about what Messiah said. He writes several of the sermons, for like I would say monologues, but sermons that Messiah, only Matthew writes that. But think about it. A king's words are so important for his people, right? To be under the king, you need to understand what that looks like. You need to understand how he functions, what he says, how we want to be in that kingdom, right? The kingdom of heaven is at hand, all right? So again, perspectives. These are different ways to look at it as we're reading to help us understand it. So Matthew ends with the resurrection, the hope. Go to the Old Testament, read through the Tanakh. The resurrection, that's what they're waiting for, the resurrection of life, okay? That's what it ends in. But then when you go over to Mark goes a little bit further. He talks about the ascension, the rising up, right? He was a good servant. A good servant is rewarded, so he goes up. That's what he ends with. But if we go to Luke ends with the promise of a helper. Because as man, we can't do it, right? So we're going to have the helper, the Holy Spirit. That's what's going to help man. And then when we get to John, we have the promise of his return. All right. Even at the end of John, he's like, John, do what you got to do. Do what you're supposed to do, right? Feed my sheep. And then John's second half is Revelation. So absolutely all about the return, the second coming. Get ready, right? All right, so this is just a rundown, just a basic comparison between the Gospels. I hope this will kind of help you with the perspective of as you read through them to start looking for those differences. So I thank you so much for joining us. We hope you have a great evening and a great day tomorrow, great week, and we will see you later. Shalom.